The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, spreading soft gold light across quiet streets. It was one of those days that felt almost too peaceful, where everything seemed to move a little slower than usual. School had just ended, and students were spilling out in every direction, laughing, calling to friends, and dragging their backpacks along the sidewalks. Among them walked a 16-year-old boy named Malik Johnson. He had a calm face and an easy smile, the kind of person who never seemed to rush even when everyone else did. His basketball shoes squeaked slightly on the pavement as he walked home from practice, his favorite playlist humming quietly through one earbud. Malik wasn't thinking about anything special, just about how tired his legs felt, how good dinner was going to taste, and how his mom had promised to take him driving that weekend. It was a normal day, the kind of day that didn't give you any reason to think something might change in the next few minutes. His neighborhood was quiet, lined with trees that were just starting to turn color. Kids played tag a few houses down, and someone was mowing their lawn. Malik lived here his whole life. Everyone knew his mom, Renee Johnson, a respected FBI agent who'd worked her way up from local law enforcement. People called her Agent Johnson, even when she was just buying groceries or walking their dog. At home, Malik and his mom were close. They joked often, shared breakfast every morning, and watched mystery shows together. Renee was strict about school, though. She always said, "Education is your protection in this world." Malik had taken that seriously. His grades were good, and he hoped to study computer engineering one day. But outside of school and home, Malik was just another teenager, someone who liked sneakers, basketball, and late-night video games. He wasn't a troublemaker. He'd never been in trouble before. He didn't even like confrontation. As he walked, a cool breeze brushed past and he pulled up his hoodie without thinking. The hoodie was gray with his school logo printed on the front. It wasn't anything special, but it made him feel comfortable. He took a sip from the bottle of water in his bag and crossed the small intersection near the park. That was when he noticed a patrol car parked across the street. It wasn't the first time he'd seen one. Police cars were common in this part of town, but this one made him pause for half a second. It was just sitting there, engine running, windows rolled up. He kept walking, not giving it much thought. After all, he wasn't doing anything wrong. A block later, the same car rolled slowly forward, its tires crunching against the road. Malik glanced sideways but didn't stop. He remembered what his mom always told him. "If you're ever stopped by police, stay calm, be respectful, and call me right away." He'd never had to test that advice before. As he reached the corner store, Malik waved at Mr. Patel, the owner, who smiled and waved back. He bought a bottle of juice, joked a little about how expensive everything was getting, and stepped back out into the sunshine. When he turned, the patrol car was still there. For a moment, he frowned. Maybe they were just looking for someone. Maybe it had nothing to do with him. He wasn't sure. He started walking again, feeling the beat of his music as he tried to shake off the thought. At that same moment, about 15 minutes away, Agent Renee Johnson was finishing a meeting at the FBI field office downtown. She was focused, as always, reviewing notes, closing her laptop, already thinking about what to make for dinner. Malik had texted her earlier. Practice ran late. Walking home now, she'd replied with a simple, "Okay, see you soon." Renee's coworkers often joked that she could switch from agent to mom in a heartbeat. She'd smile and say, "That's the hardest job I've got." To her, work was important, but Malik was her purpose. Everything she'd done, every long night she'd worked, was for him. Back on the street, Malik walked past a small grocery store and an auto shop. He didn't notice that the patrol car had pulled closer this time. Its shadow stretched across the pavement, long and slow. He reached into his pocket to check his phone, typing a quick message to his mom about stopping for a snack. Then faintly through his music, he heard something, just a sound at first. A car door closing. He looked up. 2 officers had stepped out of the car, talking quietly to each other. Malik's stomach tensed, though he didn't know why. One of them looked his way. Malik did what his mother had taught him since he was a kid. He stayed calm, kept his hands visible, and waited. But then the officers started walking toward him. He took a slow breath. There was nothing to worry about, he told himself. He hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe they needed directions or were looking for someone nearby. That had to be it. He tried not to think too much as they got closer. At home, Renee packed her things, ready to leave the office. She smiled at her colleague, said goodnight, and stepped into the elevator. She didn't know yet that the next few minutes would test her in a way her training never could. Back on the street, Malik shifted his bag higher on his shoulder and prepared to keep walking. The sky had turned a soft pink now. Birds sat on the power lines. It was still such a normal day, at least on the surface. He remembered the time his mom told him about her first week in the FBI. She said, "People won't always see you for who you are. That's why you have to know it yourself." That line stayed in his head. He thought about it often, especially when news stories came on about things happening to people who looked like him. But he always believed he'd be safe. His mom worked in law enforcement. He knew how to act, what to say, what not to do. Still, a small voice inside whispered that something about this moment felt different. As the officers approached, Malik tried to smile. He paused his music, took one earbud out, and nodded politely. They hadn't said anything yet, and he didn't want to seem nervous. Just then a car passed by, music blasting, and the noise filled the space. The officers looked around briefly, then back at Malik, and that's when he saw it. The confusion in their faces, as if they were trying to figure something out. Malik didn't know it yet, but somewhere nearby a police radio had called out a description. Male, mid-teens, gray hoodie, carrying a backpack. It wasn't a rare description. It could have been almost anyone. As Malik waited, the street around him stayed calm. A woman walked her dog on the opposite sidewalk. Someone in the distance laughed. Nothing about this scene looked like a moment that could change lives. Inside his bag, his phone buzzed again, a message from his mom saying she was leaving work and heading home. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down the street toward his house, wondering how much longer it would take to get there. He was only 10 minutes away, and still something in the air felt heavier now, as if time had slowed down just a little. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of fresh-cut grass. Malik thought about dinner again. Maybe pasta, maybe his mom's favorite lemon chicken. He smiled at the thought. He didn't see his mom's car yet, but he knew she'd be home soon. She always was. In that small space of calm before things changed, Malik didn't feel scared, not yet. He felt curious, cautious, but still hopeful, because in his world, safety wasn't supposed to be something you had to earn. It was supposed to be something you could trust. And for now, he still did. Malik adjusted his backpack strap and kept walking, his steps steady but a little slower now. The two officers were behind him, their voices faint. He told himself not to worry, but he could feel their presence like a shadow that wouldn't go away. He turned the corner toward Maple Street, the one that led straight to his house. He liked this part of the neighborhood. It always felt safe, lined with trees and small houses that looked warm and lived in. But today, that same street suddenly felt different. He didn't know why. From behind he heard the sound of footsteps on pavement. Then a calm but firm voice called out, "Hey, young man, can we talk to you for a second?" Malik froze for half a moment. He turned around slowly, careful just like his mom had taught him. The two officers were walking toward him now. They didn't look angry, just serious, their hands resting near their belts. He nodded slightly. "Sure," he said, his voice steady though his heart beat faster. One of the officers, the taller one, stepped a little closer. "Where you headed?" "Home," Malik replied. "Just coming from basketball practice." The officer looked him up and down. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. Couple blocks away." The shorter officer tilted his head. "Mind showing us some ID?" Malik hesitated. I don't have it on me. It's in my bag with my school stuff." The taller one nodded. "Go ahead and grab it." Malik carefully unzipped his backpack. His hands were a little shaky now, not because he was afraid of the officers, but because he didn't understand why they were stopping him. He tried to stay calm. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his school ID card. The taller officer studied it for a few seconds. "You said you're coming from practice?" "Yes, sir. School's like a mile away. I walk most days." The officer nodded but didn't say much. The shorter one, meanwhile, glanced around the street as if looking for something. Or someone. Malik could feel the silence stretching out between them. He tried to fill it. "Is something wrong?" he asked. The taller officer looked at him again. "We got a call about a possible suspect in the area. Young male, gray hoodie, backpack. Just making sure everything checks out." Malik blinked. "Oh," he said quietly. Okay, well, I just finished practice. You can call my coach if you want. The taller officer gave a polite nod, but his expression didn't soften. We just have to make sure, that's all. Malik tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He could feel people watching from nearby. Someone across the street had paused while walking their dog. Another person stood near their porch, phone in hand. It made him uncomfortable being the center of attention like this. At that moment, a small voice inside him said he should call his mom. But he didn't want to bother her. She was probably still driving home from work. Besides, the officers hadn't done anything wrong. They were just doing their job. That's what he told himself. The shorter officer spoke up. "What's in the bag besides your ID?" "Just clothes, shoes, and my school stuff," Malik said. "Can you open it for us?" Malik hesitated again, but nodded. He slowly unzipped the bag wider, showing them a pair of sneakers, some notebooks, and his water bottle. Everything was exactly what he said it was. The taller officer nodded again, his voice softer this time. "All right, looks fine." Malik felt a small wave of relief wash over him. "Can I go now?" he asked politely. The officers exchanged a look. For a second, no one spoke. Then the taller one said, "Yeah, just hang on a moment. We need to verify something real quick." Malik nodded, though his chest felt tight again. One of the officers stepped away, speaking into his radio quietly. The other stayed nearby, eyes still on Malik. The silence between them stretched. Malik wanted to text his mom, but he didn't want to make the situation worse by pulling out his phone without asking. So he just stood there, hands visible, trying to look calm. Meanwhile, at that same moment, Renee was halfway home. The radio played softly in her car, but she wasn't really listening. She was thinking about Malik, about how independent he was becoming. 16 now, almost grown. She smiled at the thought, her phone buzzed. She reached over to glance at it during a stoplight. Just a message from one of her co-workers about tomorrow's briefing. She set the phone down again, not realizing how soon that same phone would be her lifeline. Back on Maple Street, Malik shifted from one foot to the other, trying to stay patient. The officer with the radio was still talking quietly. The sun had dipped lower now, casting long shadows across the road. After what felt like forever, the taller officer came back. "Okay," he said. "You said you live around here, right?" "Yes, sir. 2 streets down. You mind if we walk you there? Just to confirm?" Malik frowned slightly. "You want to walk me home?" "Just a quick check. There's been a few reports lately. Nothing personal." He didn't want to argue. "Okay," he said finally. So the 3 of them began walking down the street together. It felt strange. He, a kid coming from practice, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Neighbors glanced up from their yards. Cars slowed as they passed. Malik's cheeks burned with embarrassment. He didn't say anything. He didn't know what to say. They reached the small park near his house, the one where he used to play tag when he was younger. A group of younger kids were playing basketball there now. One of them called out his name. Malik waved back half-heartedly. The officers looked around, scanning the area. The taller one spoke again, almost casually. "You said your mom's home?" "She will be soon. She works downtown. What does she do?" Malik hesitated. "She's in law enforcement," he said finally. The officers exchanged a quick glance, though neither said anything. By the time they reached his street, Malik felt drained. He pointed down the block. "That's my house there, the white one with the blue door." The taller officer nodded. "All right, thanks for your time." Malik waited, expecting them to say something else, but they didn't. They just stood there for a moment longer before turning back toward their car. He exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders bit by bit. As he started walking toward his front yard, his phone buzzed. A text from his mom. "Home in 5, want me to pick up dinner?" He smiled faintly and typed back, "No need. I'm home." But before he could hit send, a voice called out behind him again. "Hold up, kid," he turned. The officers were standing by their car, and one of them was looking at his radio again. Malik's stomach sank. "Yes?" he said softly. The taller officer frowned, glancing between Malik and the small device in his hand. "Just need to double-check something." "Stay there a second." Malik nodded slowly. He didn't know what else to do. A man from across the street who'd been watching the whole time began recording quietly on his phone. Malik saw it out of the corner of his eye. He wasn't sure if it made him feel safer or more nervous. A few seconds later, the shorter officer said something low to his partner, too quiet for Malik to hear. That was when he decided to call his mom, not because he was scared, but because he didn't want to handle it wrong. She always told him to call if he ever felt unsure. He pulled out his phone, stepped to the side of the sidewalk, and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart. You home?" "Almost," Malik said, trying to keep his voice even. "But, there are a couple of officers talking to me. They said I match a description." There was a pause. He could hear her voice change slightly, calm but sharp. "Where are you?" "Maple Street, near the park." "I'm on my way," she said. "Don't move. Don't argue. Just stay calm." "Okay," Malik said quietly. He didn't know that at that very moment she had already turned her car around, lights flashing in her mind even if not on her dashboard. Malik slipped the phone back into his pocket, taking a deep breath. The officers were still by their car, talking quietly. The man across the street was still recording. Everything felt frozen, like the world had stopped spinning for a moment. Malik didn't know what would happen next. He just knew his mom was coming, and for some reason that thought gave him enough strength to stand a little taller. Renee's phone slid back into the cup holder as she took a sharp turn onto the main road. The city lights flickered against her windshield, stretching in long reflections across the glass. Her heart was steady, but her mind was racing faster than traffic. She'd heard hundreds of emergency calls in her career. She'd responded to more than she could count. But this wasn't work, this was personal. Her son had said only a few words, yet she knew the tone of his voice too well. It was calm on the surface, but behind it was confusion, a quiet tension he was trying to hide. That alone told her enough. She pressed lightly on the gas. Her thoughts bounced between two worlds, the professional one, where she was trained to stay composed, and the motherly one, where fear had no rules. At the next red light, she switched on her siren briefly. Not the loud, blaring kind, just the one her department used for unmarked cars. People moved aside as she passed. In the distance, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving behind a soft orange trace on the horizon. Renee whispered to herself, "Please, just let him be okay." She didn't doubt her son's ability to handle himself. She'd taught him since he was little how to stay calm, how to speak respectfully, how to protect his dignity even when others didn't see it. Still, she knew that sometimes doing everything right wasn't enough. Meanwhile, on Maple Street, Malik stood quietly near the park sign. The two officers were still by their patrol car, their heads bent over the radio, talking low. The glow from the streetlight hit the side of his face, making his expression hard to read, half confusion, half hope. He looked down the street, waiting to see his mom's car. He knew she wouldn't be long. She never was. The man across the street was still recording, pretending to check his phone every now and then. A few more neighbors had peeked out from their porches, whispering among themselves. Malik shifted on his feet. He didn't want anyone to think this was a scene. He didn't want to be the center of anything. He just wanted to go home. The shorter officer finally looked up from the radio and started walking back toward him. "Everything okay?" Malik asked quietly. The officer didn't answer right away. "Just waiting for confirmation," he said, his tone neutral. Malik nodded, unsure what that meant. He thought of calling his mom again, but decided against it. She was probably already close. Back in the car, Renee's phone buzzed again. A message from her colleague at the field office. "Everything all right?" "You left quick." She didn't answer. There was no time for that. She turned onto Maple, her headlights sweeping across familiar houses and parked cars. She slowed down near the corner, scanning the block. Then she saw them. The patrol car, lights still off but unmistakable, and beside it her son, standing still, hands at his sides. She parked fast but smooth, stopping a short distance away. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. Her badge was clipped to her belt, just visible enough. She didn't raise her voice or rush toward them. She simply walked with the kind of quiet confidence that made people pay attention before she even spoke. Malik spotted her instantly. His shoulders dropped with relief. "Mom," he said softly. The two officers turned at the same time. One looked puzzled. The other's eyes widened slightly. Renee gave them a firm nod, not unkind but filled with authority. "Good evening," she said, voice calm. "I'm Special Agent Renee Johnson, FBI. That's my son." There was a brief silence, the kind that says more than words ever could. The taller officer blinked. "Ma'am, We were just verifying. I understand, she said, cutting gently across him without raising her tone. May I ask what the issue is? The officer shifted. We received a report about a possible suspect in the area. The description matched a student walking home from practice? She asked, her eyebrows slightly raised. The officer hesitated. Well, it was general information. We were just doing our due diligence. Renee nodded slowly. Of course. And has he done anything suspicious? No, ma'am, the shorter officer said quickly. He's been cooperative. Good, Renee said. Then this situation is concluded. Her tone wasn't angry. It was the tone of someone used to command, but also of someone deeply aware of what could have gone wrong. She turned slightly toward Malik. You okay? Yes, ma'am, he said, relief in his voice. Just waiting. She gave him a small, reassuring smile before facing the officers again. I appreciate you doing your job, she said carefully. But next time, make sure the details are specific before you stop a child on his way home. The taller officer nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Understood, Agent Johnson. The man across the street lowered his phone a little, realizing the tension had melted. A few neighbors went back inside, whispering as they closed their doors. Renee placed a light hand on her son's shoulder. Let's go home, she said softly. Malik nodded, his relief almost visible. They walked back toward her car together. The officers didn't say another word, just watched silently as she opened the door for her son. When they were both inside, she started the engine but didn't drive right away. She sat for a moment, letting the air settle. Malik looked at her. I didn't do anything, Mom. I promise. I know you didn't, she said gently, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. They said I matched a description, he went on. Someone in a gray hoodie. That's all, Renee sighed softly. I believe you. And I believe they thought they were being careful. But sometimes caution looks different depending on who you are. Malik nodded slowly, not fully understanding but knowing what she meant. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. The neighborhood lights flickered past, soft and familiar again. When they pulled into the driveway, Malik exhaled deeply. I thought it was just going to be a normal walk, he said. It was supposed to be, Renee replied. You did everything right, baby. I'm proud of you for staying calm. He smiled faintly. I remembered what you always said, and stay polite. Don't panic. That's exactly what saved you, she said quietly. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of the candle she'd left burning earlier. Malik dropped his bag by the couch and sank into the chair, finally letting his shoulders relax. Renee set her keys down and looked at him for a long moment. There was love in her eyes, but also something else. A quiet sadness that came from knowing the world too well. She walked over and brushed a hand over his hair, something she hadn't done in years. You shouldn't have to think about all that, you know, she said softly. He looked up at her. But that's life, right? She shook her head slightly. It's not the way it should be. They stayed like that for a moment, just mother and son, the house silent around them except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then Malik said, The people were recording. I didn't know if that helped or made it worse. Renee smiled faintly. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it just reminds the world to pay attention. He nodded, leaning back against the couch. Do you think they'll get in trouble? I don't know, she said honestly. But I'll be filing a report. Not out of anger, just to make sure the right lessons are learned. He thought about that. You think they'll care? They will when it comes from the bureau, she said, her voice quiet but certain. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Malik stared at it, then said, Mom? Yeah? I wasn't scared, he said. But I was embarrassed. Everyone was looking. I didn't even do anything. Renee took a slow breath, her heart tightening. I know. And that feeling, that's the hardest part. But what matters is how you carried yourself. You kept your dignity and you stayed safe. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm glad you came, he said finally. She smiled. You know I always will. Outside the night deepened. The sound of crickets filled the air, and for the first time since that phone call, the house felt calm again. Renee went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stared out the window. She could still see the faint reflection of the patrol car lights in her memory, blue and red fading into the dark. It wasn't anger she felt. It was a heavy mix of relief and frustration. Relief that her son was home safe. Frustration that it had even happened. Behind her, Malik turned on the TV, flipping through channels without watching. He was quiet again, thoughtful. When she finally sat beside him, he looked at her and said, "You think things will ever change?" Renee didn't answer right away. She looked at her son, tall now, almost grown, still with that same kind smile she'd known since he was a baby. Then she said softly, "They will, one person at a time. And maybe tonight was one of those moments." Malik nodded slowly. Outside, the night breeze moved through the trees. The street was quiet again, peaceful, as if nothing had happened there just an hour ago. But inside that small house, both of them knew something had changed, not just for them, but for the way they'd see the world from now on. The next morning began quietly. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, falling in soft squares on the table. Malik sat there staring into his bowl of cereal, stirring it slowly without really eating. The house was calm, but it wasn't the usual kind of calm. It was the heavy silence that comes after something unexpected, the kind that makes even the sound of the refrigerator hum louder than normal. His mom, Renee, moved around the kitchen in her usual smooth rhythm, pouring coffee, checking her phone, and flipping through a file she'd brought home. But every few seconds her eyes flicked toward her son. She didn't say anything right away. She wanted to give him space to think. Finally, she said softly, "Did you sleep okay?" Malik nodded, though he hadn't really slept much. His mind had replayed the whole thing over and over. The way the officers had looked at him, the way everyone had stared, and the sound of his mother's calm voice cutting through it all when she arrived. He glanced up at her. "Yeah, I'm fine." She didn't believe that for a second, but she didn't push him. "You sure?" he sighed. "I just don't get why they thought it was me. I wasn't doing anything." Renee set her mug down and sat across from him. "Sometimes people see what they expect to see," she said quietly. "And sometimes they don't stop to think before acting on it." Malik looked down. "But that's not fair." "No," she said. "It's not." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, a car engine started somewhere down the street and a dog barked faintly. The world was moving on as if nothing had happened, but inside neither of them could quite do the same. After breakfast, Renee grabbed her blazer and badge. She hesitated at the door, then turned back to him. "I have to go into the office for a few hours. You okay here?" Malik nodded. "Yeah. If anyone from the department calls, let me handle it," she said firmly. He frowned. "They're gonna call you?" "They might," she replied. There's always a report when officers interact with minors, especially when someone records it. "I'm sure the video's already circulating." Malik's stomach sank a little. "People saw it?" Renee gave him a gentle look. "Don't worry about that right now. Just focus on resting. I'll handle the rest." After she left, Malik sat by the window. His basketball lay on the floor near his backpack. Normally, he'd have gone outside to shoot hoops or meet his friends. But today he didn't feel like being seen. He picked up his phone instead. There were a few messages from classmates, some asking if he was okay, others just curious. One said, "Saw the video, bro." "That's wild." He stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something heavier, something harder to name. A mix of embarrassment, disbelief, and exhaustion. At the FBI field office, Renee walked through the halls with the same composure she always had, but inside she was a storm. Her colleagues greeted her as usual, though a few gave her longer looks, the kind that told her they'd seen the same video. In her office, she set down her bag, took a deep breath, and called internal affairs. She explained what had happened, keeping her tone even, factual, and professional. She didn't mention that she was a mother. She just gave the details as an agent. Still, everyone listening on the other end of the line could hear the personal weight in her voice. After she hung up, her supervisor stopped by the door. "You okay, Johnson?" She nodded. "I'm fine. I heard what happened. You handled it well." Renee gave a polite smile. "I just did what any parent would do." He hesitated. "We'll be coordinating with local law enforcement. There might be a review." "I expected that," she said calmly. "It's necessary." He nodded and left, and for a long moment Renee sat there staring at the paperwork on her desk but not seeing it. All she could picture was her son, standing there under that streetlight trying to stay calm. That image wouldn't leave her. Back at home, Malik turned on the TV to distract himself. Every channel seemed too loud, too bright. He turned it off again and sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. Then he saw it, a video clip someone had shared online. It was short, less than a minute. It showed the officers talking to him, then his mom walking up. Her calm, commanding voice could be heard clearly. "That's my son. Lower your weapons, one now." He didn't realize until he saw it from the outside just how powerful that moment had been. The comments were full of praise for her composure, her authority, her strength. But Malik didn't focus on that. He just kept replaying his own face and how small he looked, how nervous. He turned the phone off and put it face down. A few hours later, the sound of the front door opening pulled him out of his thoughts. His mom was back. She looked tired but collected. "Hey, kiddo." "Hey." She sat beside him on the couch. "How was your day?" He shrugged. "Quiet." "Good. That's how I like it." They sat there for a while, not talking, just existing in the same space. The late afternoon light poured in through the window, casting soft golden lines across the floor. Finally, Malik spoke. "Are they in trouble? The officers?" Renee sighed. "They're being reviewed. That doesn't always mean trouble. It means accountability." He nodded slowly. "You think they'll remember what happened?" "I hope so," she said. Sometimes it takes a moment like that to remind people to see others as human first. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "It's weird, Mom. I keep thinking about how fast it all happened. One second I was walking home, the next, everything changed." She looked at him with soft eyes. "That's how life is sometimes. It changes in a blink." He glanced at her badge sitting on the table beside her. "You're always so calm, even yesterday. How do you do that?" She smiled faintly. "Training. And a lot of prayer." He chuckled quietly, the first real laugh since the night before. "Besides," she added, "if I lose control, I lose clarity. And I needed to be clear in that moment, and were you?" "Yeah," Malik said softly. "When you showed up, everything felt different, like I could breathe again." Renee reached over and squeezed his hand gently. "That's what mothers are for." The next day, word spread fast. Neighbors stopped by to check in. One woman from down the street brought over a pie and said she'd been watching from her porch that night. "Your son handled himself like a gentleman," she told Renee. "You raised him right." Renee thanked her kindly, though her mind was elsewhere. Every compliment felt like a reminder of how close things had come to going differently. Later that evening, the local police chief called. He was polite and professional. He said the department was reviewing procedures and that the officers had reported the interaction as routine. Renee didn't argue. She didn't accuse. She simply said, "I appreciate the follow-up. Let's make sure our communities feel seen and respected moving forward." After she hung up, Malik came into the kitchen holding a notebook. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever wish you did something else?" "Not this job, I mean. Something that doesn't deal with all this stress?" She smiled at the question. "All the time," she said honestly. "But then I remember why I started. I wanted to make things fair. I wanted to be part of the change." He nodded. "Guess that's what you did last night." She laughed softly. "Maybe so." As the evening went on, they watched TV together, something light and funny. The laughter felt good. A small piece of normal returning to the house. When Malik finally went to bed, Renee sat alone in the quiet living room. She looked around at the photos on the wall. Her son in his Little League uniform, his graduation from middle school, his first day of high school. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered a small prayer of thanks. Then she made a decision. She opened her laptop and began typing a report, not just for the bureau, but a personal statement she planned to share later. It wasn't about anger or accusation. It was about awareness, about the reality that even someone with a badge could have her own child mistaken for something he wasn't. She wrote about dignity, patience, and humanity, the things she wished more people led with before judgment. When she finished, she sat back feeling the first bit of peace she'd felt in 2 days. Upstairs, Malik was already asleep. His room was filled with the soft glow of a nightlight. His sneakers still by the door, his hoodie folded neatly on the chair. Outside, the street was quiet again, calm, still, and peaceful, just like before. But for Renee and her son, something inside had shifted forever. It wasn't bitterness. It was awareness, a clearer understanding of how quickly life could test you. and how strength sometimes meant simply staying calm when everything else told you not to. And in that quiet house, mother and son both knew that what happened would not define them. It would only make them stronger, wiser, and more determined to walk forward with grace. The days that followed were quiet but heavy. The world outside kept moving. Cars passing by, kids laughing on their way to school, neighbors mowing their lawns. Yet inside the Johnson house, time seemed slower. It was as if both Malik and his mother were still catching up with everything that had happened. For Malik, going back to school wasn't easy. The first morning, he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his hoodie, then stopping halfway. He stared at himself, the same face, the same boy, but he didn't feel quite the same anymore. Downstairs, his mom waited with breakfast. "You ready?" she asked, keeping her voice light. He nodded. "Yeah," she gave him a small smile. "Just remember, hold your head up. You didn't do anything wrong." He smiled back, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The ride to school was quiet. The radio played softly, some old soul song about strength and hope. Malik looked out the window, watching the town roll by. The corner store, the basketball court, the street where it all happened. It was strange how everything looked normal, though it didn't feel that way. When they pulled up to the school, Malik hesitated before opening the door. "You think people saw the video?" he asked. Renee didn't lie. "Probably, but people will see what they want to see. Just stay true to who you are." He nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out. As soon as he entered the hallway, whispers followed. Some kids gave him small nods of respect, others just stared. His best friend, a tall boy with a warm smile, walked up and bumped his shoulder gently. "You good, man?" "Yeah," Malik said. "I'm good. You're kind of famous now," his friend joked softly. "Your mom's a legend," Malik chuckled, shaking his head. "She always was. Classes went by slowly." Teachers looked at him with that mix of concern and curiosity. One of them pulled him aside after class and said, "If you ever need to talk, my door's open." He thanked her, though he didn't really know what he'd say. What could he say? That he was fine? That he wasn't scared anymore? None of it felt completely true. That afternoon when he came home, his mother was sitting at the kitchen table typing on her laptop. She looked up and smiled. "How was school?" "Better than I thought," he said. "A lot of people were nice about it." "Good," she said. "That's a start." He dropped his backpack on the floor and sat down. "Are they still talking about it at your work?" She sighed softly. "Yes, the investigation is still going on, but I think something good might come out of it." Malik leaned forward. "Like what?" "Well," she said thoughtfully, "they're planning to start a joint program, local police and federal agents, about community awareness and youth engagement. They asked if I'd be willing to help lead it." His eyes brightened. "That's actually pretty cool," she smiled. "It could be. Maybe this whole thing can help change something." For the first time in days, Malik saw hope in her expression, real, steady hope. The following week, Renee attended a meeting with both law enforcement officers and community leaders. The mood was serious but constructive. People spoke about rebuilding trust, understanding bias, and learning to see beyond assumptions. When it was her turn to speak, Renee stood and looked around the room. "I'm here today not just as an agent," she said, her voice calm but clear, "but as a mother. My son was stopped because someone made a quick judgment. I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to ask that we do better, all of us." The room was silent. Even the people who had come in defensive or uncertain seemed to listen. She continued, "Every officer who puts on a badge does so to protect. But protection begins with understanding. Every young person deserves to walk home without fear, and every officer deserves training that helps them respond with fairness, not assumptions." By the time she sat down, the atmosphere had changed. Heads nodded around the table. The chief spoke next, thanking her for her words and promising to make that training a priority. When she got home that evening, Malik was waiting for her. "How'd it go?" he asked. She smiled tiredly but proudly. "Better than I expected. Sometimes people just need to hear the truth in a human way." He nodded, thinking about that. "You think it'll really change anything?" "It might not change everything," she said, "but it'll change something. And that's how it starts." That night, Malik went out to shoot basketball hoops in the driveway. The air was cool, and the sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink. His mom watched from the porch for a moment, her coffee mug in hand. Every time he made a basket, he looked a little lighter. When he finally came back inside, slightly out of breath, he said, "I think I'm gonna try out for the team again." She smiled wide. "That's my boy." Over the next few weeks, life began to find its rhythm again. Malik focused on school, sports, and his friends. Renee kept working, balancing her professional duties with her new role in community outreach. The tension slowly faded into something else, a quiet strength and understanding of resilience. One Friday evening, as they sat watching a movie together, Malik turned to his mom. "You know what's funny?" "What?" she asked, smiling. "I used to think you just had a regular job. Now I see it's kind of a big deal." She laughed softly. "It's just a job, sweetheart. The big deal is how you handle what life gives you." He nodded. "Yeah, I guess we both learned that." Later that night, after Malik went to bed, Renee scrolled through her phone. She saw news articles about new policies being tested in local departments, things like mandatory de-escalation training and youth outreach events. Small steps, but real ones. She thought about all the other mothers out there, mothers who didn't have a badge, who didn't have the authority to walk onto a scene and change the outcome with a single command. The thought humbled her deeply. She whispered a quiet promise to herself. "I'll keep speaking up. Not just for my son, for all of them." The next morning, Malik woke up early to help her make breakfast. They laughed while flipping pancakes, spilling syrup, and arguing about whose were better. It was the first time everything truly felt normal again. When they sat down to eat, Renee looked at her son with pride. "You know," she said, "you handled yourself better than most adults would have. I hope you're proud of that." He looked down, a little shy. "I just did what you taught me, stay calm." She smiled. "And that's what saved you." A few weeks later, Malik's school invited his mother to speak at a student assembly about safety and awareness. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of young faces, she felt the weight of what she'd gone through, and how much good could come from sharing it. She began. "Sometimes the hardest thing in life is to stay calm when the world is not. But calm doesn't mean weak. It means strong enough to think before reacting, strong enough to trust that your worth isn't defined by someone else's mistake." The students listened, quiet and focused. Malik sat near the back, watching his mom speak with pride. When she finished, the room broke into applause. On the drive home, Malik said softly, "You're really good at that." "At what?" "Making people listen," she smiled. "Maybe because I speak from the heart." He looked out the window, thinking, "Maybe I'll do that someday too." "Speak?" He nodded. "Yeah, about this. About what it's like. Maybe it could help someone else," she smiled, her eyes warm. "Then I'll be in the front row, cheering you on." As they pulled into the driveway, the sky was beginning to darken again. That same golden hour when everything feels soft and honest. Malik carried his backpack inside while his mom lingered for a moment, watching the sun dip below the trees. She thought about how everything had changed, and yet somehow, everything had come full circle. There was peace in that thought, not the kind that forgets, but the kind that heals. That night, Malik wrote in his notebook for the first time in months. Just a few sentences, but enough to say what he felt. "I learned that people can be wrong about you, but what matters is knowing who you really are. I learned that calm is power, and I learned that sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They just show up at the right time and stand beside you." He smiled when he read it back. Then he closed the notebook and turned off the light. In the quiet house, Renee checked on him one last time, watching her son sleep peacefully. The worry that had once filled her heart was now replaced by something deeper: pride, strength, and hope. Outside, the world was calm again. The same streets, the same stars, but a new understanding between them, that courage and love can change even the hardest moments. And for Renee and her son, that was more than enough.